we're good to go. So everyone should see the recording sign going. So I don't know, does anyone have any last minute questions or issues or things they want to tell the group or Judge Harris? Okay. All right, Judge Harris, it's your show.
Hardly. We'll see. All right. Good evening. And again, my name is Judge Paul Harrison. I am a district court judge in Ramsey County, and I want to welcome everyone here for this fireside chat with Bar Affinity organization leaders. Thank you guys all for joining me for this critical and important discussion with the Affinity Bar leaders to reflect on, one, the murder of George Floyd, but also what we are trying and are doing after the murder of George Floyd. The tragic murder of George Floyd and of Breonna Taylor and of Ahmaud Arbery and of so many Black and brown lives have created a list too long for us to name them all. This has created a reckoning on the issue of racism in our country, in Minnesota, and more importantly, in the legal profession here in Minnesota. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge and remember the lives of George Floyd and of Breonna Taylor and of Ahmaud Arbery by taking a brief moment of silence. We say their names and hold them in our thoughts, and it's in their names that we do this work and we push this work forward. As I indicated, tonight's going to be a candid conversation with all of you, leaders of the bar organization. And it's going to be an open conversation that I hope that we are all honest about where we're at and where we need to be. We've brought all of you together to talk about what we're doing to promote social and racial equity. What are we doing to increase diversity and inclusion in our profession? Highlight the work that we're all doing, and to reflect on our challenges as well as our successes and create a roadmap moving forward to deal with this reckoning on racism. So before we continue, I do want to introduce the individuals who will be participating in this conversation. First, I want to start with the representative from the Hennepin County Bar Association, Brandon Vaughn. Brandon?
Thanks, Judge Harris. I'm Brandon Vaughn. I am the president-elect of the Hennepin County Bar. Our president, Esteban Rivera, sends his regards and says he's sorry he can't be a part of the conversation this evening, but we've had a chance to chat. I'm a partner at the law firm Robbins Kaplan, and in the wake of George Floyd's death and the conversations that have been happening within the community, the Hennepin County Bar Association has really rolled up our sleeves to try to think about how we can develop programming and work with organizations to try to respond to systemic racism. There are a lot of concerns as a bar organization, as bar leaders, that we take the steps to ensure access to justice, particularly for communities of color. And the Hennepin County Bar Association this year and all of our board meetings will have dialogues about diversity and inclusion efforts, as well as trying to continue to work with various organizations such as the Affinity Bars to bring about change.
Next, from the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, we have Frank Aba-Onu. Frank?
Thank you, Judge. Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Aba-Onu, and I am the president of the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers and shareholder at the Bassford Law Firm. And as both Brandon and Judge Harris have said, this is an important conversation, and it's something that we cannot overlook. We cannot let slide. We must move forward, and we have to be proactive in what we do. So on behalf of MABL, we're very glad that we are getting together as bar leaders to have these conversations because they're difficult, but they're needed. And we are perfectly situated to make change that will be positive, not only for our communities, but for the legal community as well.
From the Minnesota Asian Pacific American Bar Association, Anne Jenrette-Thomas. Anne?
Thanks, Judge Harris. Yes, my name is Anne Jenrette-Thomas, and I'm here in my capacity as an advisor to MNAPABA on their diversity, inclusion, and racial justice issues. My regular full-time job is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Stinson. And this has become a critical moment where, although the work that MNAPABA does address systemic racism to the extent that it is empowering Asian and Asian Pacific Islander attorneys, we're taking it to a different level now.
From the Minnesota Hispanic Bar Association, Kelvin Collado. Kelvin?
Thank you, Judge, and good evening, everyone. I am the treasurer of the Minnesota Hispanic Bar Association, and I echo everyone's comments. I think this is a very important time in the legal profession, and we need to step up as lawyers and address this call to action. So thank you all for having me here.
From the Minnesota State Bar Association, Dyan Ebert. Dyan?
Good evening. Thank you, Judge. I also want to thank everybody for joining me to participate in this important conversation. You know, the MSBA represents nearly 14,000 lawyers across the state of Minnesota and across the nation, and we have to recognize that we have an important voice to add to this conversation.
From Twin Cities Diversity in Practice, Dadri-Anne Graham. Dadri?
Thank you, Judge Harris. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dadri-Anne Graham here. I am a commercial lawyer at Cargill Incorporated. I'm here today as the co-chair of the Emerging Leaders Group within Twin Cities Diversity in Practice, and we'll be talking about some of our WILD initiatives. I echo everyone's sentiments about how important it is for us to be having this discussion, and want to add that, you know, with our unique position as Affinity and bar organization leaders, we also, it is right time now for us to be not working in silo, but in collaboration with each other to really address some of the systemic anti-Black racism that we're seeing, that we've seen, but now, in your words, Judge Harris, you know, this racial reckoning that's upon us this summer, 2020. So really happy to be here and to be talking with everybody.
Also from Twin Cities Diversity in Practice, Darnell Cage. Darnell?
Thank you very much, Judge Harris. It's good to be here. It's good to see some familiar faces here and meet some new folks. It's my privilege to be here before you all in my capacity as a co-chair of the Emerging Leaders Group in TCDIP, and also together with Dadri, representing some of the WILD initiatives that we've been doing, and just echoing everyone's points here about how important it is to have the conversation, and Dadri's point about how important it is for us to work together on these issues that have been told for years and years, but now are being recorded and sort of brought to light in this time of where we're more sedentary than we usually are. So we have to deal with these things, and we're prime positioned here as the leaders to do those things. So thank you very much.
And finally, from the Minnesota Women Lawyers, Breia Schleuss. Breia?
Thank you, Judge. We really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I am Breia Schleuss. I'm a partner at Faegre Drinker, but I'm here in my capacity today as president of Minnesota Women Lawyers. And we echo everybody's sentiments today about how critically important this conversation is particularly to address anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination in its many forms. Following the tragic death of George Floyd, Minnesota women lawyers issued a statement, and we had quoted the words of Sarah Grimke, who, although she was born in 1792, she spoke words that really resonated with our current moment, unfortunately. She wrote, "I ask no favors for my sex. I surrender not to our claim to equality. All I ask of our brethren is that they will take their feet from off of our necks and permit us to stand upright." And it's 200 years later, and the metaphor remains tragically literal. And from our perspective, we need to do better, both from Minnesota women lawyers' perspective, as well as across our legal institutions and the broader community, to intervene and advocate for change.
Breia, I think I want to start there since you did mention your organization statement. Kind of as I prepared for this, I read a lot of what your different organizations said and what you did. And one thing that stuck out in the Minnesota Women's Lawyers statement is that you talked about Minnesota women's lawyers also recognize that at this time, like times like this, words are not enough. We cannot simply demand justice and leave it at that. We will not issue a press release and walk away. To be true allies to our community members of color and to other affinity bar associations, and to be true to the mission we have set for ourselves to advance the success of women lawyers and strive for a just society, we must walk towards this injustice and be present and active. Can you talk about what have you done to be present and active and walk towards this fight of justice?
Absolutely. I think it really goes to the heart of all of our programming, and particularly this year, we are focused on addressing systemic racism and systemic discrimination in our profession. Just yesterday, we hosted a virtual event entitled Leadership in Times of Change, Reimagining the Legal Workplace. And we talked specifically about how do we face our kind of twin crises that we are currently facing as a society today, both with respect to COVID-19 as well as issues of social and racial justice. And Justice Natalie Hudson from the Minnesota Supreme Court, Jim Chosey from U.S. Bancorp, and Irene Cow from the League of Minnesota Cities, as well as Deputy General Counsel for the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, they all participated in that conversation as well to really start identifying how do we utilize our voice and our role as lawyers, both individually, but also collectively, to start changing our institutions for the better. That will be followed up. We annually host an annual Women of Color in the Law Forum with TCDIP and others. This year's Rosalie Wall Leadership Lecture will also focus specifically on the report that the ABA issued this year, which was authored by Paulette Brown and Eileen Letts, entitled Left Out and Left Behind, which focuses specifically on the challenges faced by women of color in the law. And we talk and we'll be diving into not just the issues and the research and the findings, but the recommendations and how we across race and across gender can really come together to be part of the solution, particularly as it relates to anti-racism and discrimination. We also, in addition to really focusing in on our programming, from an internal perspective, we are reviewing all of our committees and affinity groups action plans to identify how do we do deeper work, how do we connect and collaborate with others in the affinity bars, and then how do we move from what I think has really been, I guess from my own personal perspective, a lot of programming focused on the individual, right? The individual or the personal, what can we as individual lawyers in our affinity bars do to try to address these change and really start shifting to systemic change? How do we change our institutions? And that is one of our primary goals this year. We also have our own community action and advocacy committee where we're very much engaged in pro bono, as well as community service that is specifically focused on violence against women, pay equity, and access to justice. And that's just a few. I'm sure we'll be talking about many others. I do want to highlight two because Anne is part of this conversation. Not only are we engaging in board training to specifically address these issues, we also have what we call a partner leadership council where MWL partners, legal employers come together to try to share challenges, address best practices. And Anne actually did a recent session with our partner leadership council specifically addressing privilege, oppression, and intersectionality. And that's really going to be a focus.
I want to get to the Minnesota State Bar Association, Hennepin County Bar Association, but Breia, you brought up something. Looking right now at my Zoom screen, I see a great mixture of people of color, of women and men. This is kind of what you want a leadership kind of board to look like, but all too often, many of you are at tables, whether it's leadership tables in your firms, or in your organizations where you're the only people of color or there's very little people of color. What can we do to kind of, I guess, break that ceiling and get a lot of our tables looking like what we see here tonight, where you have different, folks with different ideas and lots of people of color. And I want to start with Darnell with that. Kind of what are some of the thoughts you have about really opening up paths to leadership for people of color to be at those tables?
Yeah, I think it really begins with empathy. So knowing and having an understanding for the folks in your community. And I'll say that that's one thing that we've tried to build with our initiative in TCDIP is connecting lawyers who are involved with TCDIP, connecting them to community members, folks who have been boots on the ground, and folks who have been who've experienced have different experiences than most of our attorneys do in TCDIP, and connecting them. And so what I have found to be true over the past the past few months, really since March, is that as we connect and have those conversations and build empathy toward each other and toward our community, and start to develop that sort of consensus, collective understanding of reality, recognizing that realities of a lot of folks differ across the spectrum. Only then can you start to appreciate the perspective that diverse folks can bring to the table, and then that makes it more sought after to do so. So I think empathy builds that attractiveness to having those critical masses of folks in the room, and we can build empathy by making those connections and not working in silos, and getting to know one another.
Anne, I want to throw that same question out to you.
Thank you, Judge. I actually think we need to tackle systemic oppression that is present within our industry, and it happens at every level. So what are the barriers to entry at the law school level? What are the barriers to succeeding at the law school level? Then you bring it into the employment realm, whether you are in private practice, within a firm, or in government, or in in-house counsel positions. In each of our institutions, there are unwritten rules, there are policies, there are practices that end up maintaining and perpetuating the status quo, and disadvantaging those who have historically been marginalized. And although there have been improvements, I think that is there's still so much more that needs to be done. We're essentially trying to get people of color, women, LGBT individuals to fit into a mold that was designed is for elite white men, for the success primarily of other elite white men. And there's this wonderful fable of two friends, a giraffe and an elephant. And the giraffe sees the elephant walking down the street and invites the elephant to their home, but the giraffe's home is designed for a giraffe. And so no matter what the elephant tries, you know, the elephant may try to walk light on its feet, or it just can't quite fit in. And so when I talk about dismantling systems of oppression, I'm essentially saying, what do we need to do to change the house so that it can fit everyone?
Kelvin, you got anything to add?
I'm sorry, Judge, did you direct that question to me?
I did.
Thank you. I didn't catch that. My apologies. Well, I certainly agree with Ann and Darnell that we definitely need to start from a place of empathy, as Darnell mentioned, and also addressing sort of the barriers that exclude people from this house that Ann was talking about. And the Minnesota Hispanic Bar Association has an annual program, a mentorship program that kind of addresses these barriers to our entry, where we pair up law students and with practicing attorneys to sort of help them navigate the law school, their law school experience and beyond when they start practicing attorneys, becoming practicing attorneys, so that they can sort of know how to engage in networking settings, or so that they can understand how to succeed either at the firm or doing public interest work. So I think it's important that we start a place where we're, you know, educating everyone as to what these barriers are and how to navigate these barriers, as well as looking internally and hopefully being in a position of power to change those internal structures.
I think I'm going to jump on this metaphor of this house. So each of our organizations generally represents one person in the house, and one group, whether it's Black lawyers or Hispanic lawyers or Asian Pacific Island lawyers or women lawyers. There's two individuals sitting here who represents everyone in the house, the Minnesota State Bar Association and the Hennepin Bar Association. Everyone who goes into the house is part of their organization. And reading their statement on George Floyd, the one thing that stuck out to me was when it stated that we are going to lift and support the voices and actions of others working towards the goal of equal access to justice and equal administration of public safety for all people. I want to throw this question to Dyan. To that end, what are some of the things that your organization is undertaking to really lift those voices of those folks doing that work to bring forth this equal access to the law?
Sure. Thank you so much, Judge. You know, as you say, the Minnesota State Bar Association holds sort of a unique spot in this conversation because of the broad range of our members, both in terms of numbers, but also in terms of the practice areas that these folks work in, and frankly, based upon geography. You know, we span across the state and outside of the state, and so that puts us in a unique spot. So it's no secret that MSBA's primary focus has been on education and on providing resources for our members to access for this important conversation. And part of that also includes supporting the affinity bars, many of whom are represented on this call here this evening, in their efforts. And in some of that, what we do is we simply tell our members about the things that these other organizations are doing. And just having that conversation, just opening up that door, educating our members on what's out there, because that's such an important thing for our membership to know, that there is opportunity for them to also get involved. You know, we've had a variety of educational efforts that have been put in place since George Floyd's killing. And it's been, you know, again, focused on getting information to our members. We had a CLE on police reform and lobbying efforts that can go along with looking for police reform. And we had to cut off our participants to 500. It was so popular. And so, you know, we are really focusing on trying to get the education out and to facilitate that conversation between our members and, again, the organizations that are represented here tonight.
Brandon, you know I'm coming to you next. You also have that same kind of unique place of being the occupant of the biggest room in the House, Hennepin County, and really representing a large swath of attorneys. What is the HCBA doing to really lift up the voices of many of the organizations here tonight?
Sure. You know, one of the things that makes me proud to be a member of the HCBA goes back to probably 6 or 7 years ago, actually, when the HCBA took a very meaningful look at its engagement with leaders of the organization. And the board, frankly, consisted of primarily white men who worked in, you know, large law firms in downtown Minneapolis. And they took an action plan where they said they wanted to diversify our leadership, both at the board level and frankly at the executive board level, to reflect the demographics of the legal profession and not just look at, you know, who practices downtown or age, race. We looked at all of those things. And over the past, you know, 5 to 6 years, we've seen significant strides in our leadership. That being said, the HCBA sees its role as far as having the big house, for lack of a better term, to do the same thing to fight social injustice and racial inequalities in the country. One of the conversations we've been having at the executive board level is how do we work with the judiciary and community leaders to kind of talk about access to justice. When we spent hours putting together the statement following George Floyd's death, access to justice was an important pillar. And frankly, when the HCBA revised its mission statement last year, that was part of the fabric of the organization. So I think what the HCBA intends to do is be more engaged in community involvement and trying to, as Ann mentioned earlier, break into some of the barriers in the pipeline, get into elementary schools, high schools, have participate in Know Your Rights campaigns, those types of activities, so people can understand that the system isn't necessarily going to work against them and try to dispel some of those myths, but also take the opportunity to educate our lawyers and folks who can make an impact to break down some of the societal barriers to make a difference.
I want to go to you, Frank. You've heard what Dyan and Brandon is talking about in terms of their organizations, what they're doing. What we're really talking about here is allyship, and what are allies doing to support the work of the affinity bars. What can you tell those leaders, or what do you think are some of the things from the perspective of the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers that you think these other organizations can be doing to support the work you have moving forward?
Thanks, Judge. I don't know if that's kind of put me under the bus there, but I'll take that.
Squarely under the bus.
No, I think that's a difficult question to sort of respond with, because there's just so many different ways you can go with this. But it's been heartening, at least, to talk to the leaders of the various affinity bars and the state and you know, the county organizations, because they're the people who recognize that there's work that needs to be done, and they're the people who are doing it. So that's been very, very inspiring. And I think the one thing for MABL, and just put in any affinity bar organization or just any, you know, person of color or woman or whatever you may say, whenever there's a circumstance when it hits your group, the problem that arises is that everyone turns to you, and it's you have to come up with the solutions and you have to figure it out. And they expect you, individual, or you organization to know it and figure it out. And for us, that, we want to be in the middle and we want to help facilitate change. But we also realize that we're a volunteer organization and we can't do everything. So we actually did send out a letter after we did our statement to all the affinity bars and the state and local bars saying, hey, we appreciate everything you've done. We can't tackle all these initiatives. If you have an initiative that you think would be great, take the lead, run with it, liaison with us, and as best as we can, we'll support where we can. But, here are the primary things we want to address. And we kind of looked at it, we're talking about it today. How do you affect change in the legal profession? How do you increase diversity in the legal profession? How do you ensure that the community that we serve is being represented, whether it's through the ballot box or through landlord-tenant rights or other things that may apply? So how do you work to ensure that the population that we serve have equal access to justice and it's represented in the judiciary and the legal profession? And so we kind of say, we don't have all the answers, but we know that as a group we're creative and we can come up with creative solutions. So let people use their creative work engines to come up with some of those solutions, and let's talk about them. And that's really what inspired some of this today, is to say, well, let's all meet in a group and let's talk about some of these solutions and ideas. So the long short of that answer is, we just want people to recognize the need, and we're willing to support if they're willing to do the work in trying to figure out what sort of initiatives, objectives that we can move forward as illegal entities or work within our communities to accomplish.
And Dadri, I haven't forgot about you. I do want to talk a little bit with you, and I will note that Twin Cities Diversity in Practice, their statement had a ton to unpack, and quite frankly, I think it was one of the more powerful statements that I read. But the one thing that statement did that sometimes get lost in all of the kind of systems change is really drilling down about self-care and the individual lawyer, and how are Black and brown lawyers feeling seeing all of this, tragedy, whether it's the murder of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, and not just hearing about it, but seeing the actual visual of a knee on the neck or another Black man being shot, whether it's Philando. And can you talk about what was the thought process of going into really focusing on the self-care and saying, here are the concrete things we're going to do to really address kind of the individual lawyers and what they are feeling in this moment of crisis, and then you throw on top of that COVID and murder hornets and everything else that happened in 2020, this idea that there's just, how are we caring for ourselves?
Yeah, thanks, Judge. I felt you coming right my direction. I didn't know where you were going, but I felt you coming. So it's a lot of times in D&I conversations, especially in the legal profession, over the course of the last couple of years since I've been practicing, people talk about, bringing your authentic self to the workplace. That's always included in D&I conversations. And with all of this that's happening, it's one of those things where, as Black lawyers, I know I personally was feeling like I have to now show up to work and give, 100% of myself to work when this is what I just watched. And for me, my husband and I, actually, this was the first time I was called to go out to a protest. And so there, the atmosphere at a protest to that weighing on me being in community with other Black people and allies who were marching for justice. And it was this idea that, there is a lot there that's weighing on us. And so, you know, we have great supportive leaders at TCDIP. So Darnell and I, you know, met with the executive director, other emerging leaders group leads, and we said, you know, we have to do something about this. And one of the things we came up with sponsorship from some of our member organizations, we did some facilitated discussions, healing with intent, and these were sessions with Black psychotherapists, where we had them all planned and people would sign up, and it, you know, obviously it's group therapy essentially. We couldn't do one-on-ones, but it was a safe space for people for Black lawyers to share and be in community with each other and process and just have a moment to connect with other people who are feeling the same way. The weight of everything and going into work, and feeling like you have to be at 100%, but not, you know, mentally being there, and not feeling like, you know, for most of us working in predominantly white institutions, not being able to have those candid conversations with people about how you're feeling and how everything's affecting you. And so we did a number of those sessions. That was one of the very first things we did after, I think even before we issued our statement, we started planning those sessions with two great Black male psychotherapists in the area in June, and those were really successful in the sense that, you know, people who attended said this was well needed, and, you know, they really appreciated having those moments. So that's, and that was important for us to message also to our member organizations. So not only were we providing the opportunities for Black lawyers to have that space, but it was also a signal to our member organizations, the leaders there, to think about the teams that they're managing, right? And think about how much of a burden this all is, and how much, you know, this is what, you know, bringing your whole self to work looks like. You know, you are coming into work with, you know, having seen this video and the thoughts in your head about this could have been my brother or my nephew or my son or my sister or, you know, whoever. So that was really important for us to do.
I want to turn to you, Breia. I think in the days and months after the death of George Floyd, I think kind of the feeling of Black and brown lawyers was basically, you know, not today. Don't deal with me today. We, you know, today's not the day to deal with us, right? But a lot of white lawyers were like, what can I do? And I think it was more than ever. They were like, now I see. When you say knee on the neck, I see exactly what you mean. This is horrible. What can I do to be an ally, and how can I help you? Can you talk about what is some of the things your organization was doing to really equip allies to really move this fight forward and really be on the front lines with Black and brown lawyers to really push this forward?
Absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, for Minnesota women lawyers, being a woman is not a monolithic experience, right? Our community and our members include women of color, gender non-binary and other gendered people, and women of various abilities and disabilities. And I recognize that we have differences across and among our gender. But there is are ways that we can utilize our voices and support other affinity bars and each other. And, you know, one of the things that we've been thinking about is how can we come together? I think so often the work and the conversations, including in our places of employment, have been within our diverse lawyers resource groups or our affinity bars, and those are valuable and they have meaning, and it's an opportunity to come together to talk about shared experiences. But I think now the work needs to come deeper within the institution. And one of the things that we hear about and we talk about is how do we utilize our voices, right? So as we are having a conversation, is it an opportunity to, you want me to listen or do you want me to respond? Do you want me to help share the burden by listening, or do you want me to help lift your voice by responding? And I think that more can be done, particularly from our leadership, right? So as people are talking about, if you are sitting in a room and you do not see people who look differently than you, ask who else should be part of this conversation. And I think that that is even more critical in today's remote environment when we have kind of one-on-one Zoom calls or one-on-one conversations, and we are not including broader voices in that. And I also think that there has been some sort of fear, at different seniority levels about people using or raising these voices. And I think in a way, the burden has become so great that that fear is lifting, right? I think people need to use their voices, and I think institutions want to hear from this. I also think too that there is more work that our institutional leadership needs to do. And I think that what other people have said, that the burden really has rested on the affinity bars. If we could see our historically white male leadership and others take the time to really address these issues and engage in conversations and training, not just kind of passive training, but experiential learning and training with all of the partners at a firm or within a corporate legal department, I think that that would go a long way. And I also think too that sometimes we are in an echo chamber within the legal industry. I think that corporations and others, the healthcare industry, have had greater strides than we have within the legal industry. And can we take different ideas from these other industries and really propel the legal industry forward? One example has really talked about, there's a recent article entitled "Moving Beyond Diversity Towards Racial Equity," and they actually engage and track change from a data perspective. They have an annual competency survey to engage how well their staff are equipped to identify and address interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism in the workplace. How often are staff taking risks and putting aside discomfort to engage in critical conversations? And that's part of their annual review process. But I think so often those conversations are the last thing. I think we need to move those so that they are at the forefront of the conversations that our leadership are having.
I do know that Breia and Brandon have to leave fairly shortly, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to ask you a question that I plan on asking others towards the end of tonight's discussion. And the first question, and I'll throw this out to Brandon: why is it important for the Hennepin County Bar Association to be in this space at this time to talk about these issues?
I think it's important, and not to sound cliche, but I think it's an all hands on deck issue. In order to bring about meaningful change, it needs to be a community effort. Going back to the house analogy, we are the largest bar association in the state outside of the MSBA, and we've got an obligation to our members and the greater community to address the issues. I mean, for the first time in a very long time, Minnesota is on the map. People actually know where Minnesota is now. Before, I would say I live in Minnesota, and they'd say, "Oh, where is that?" But we are literally on the map, and people are watching what we're doing. And one of my challenges to the HCBA, and I hope the affinity bars continue and join me in this challenge, is to hold the HCBA accountable. It is very easy to apply lip service and make a statement of words of what you plan on doing, or the injustices that we've seen with George Floyd and the the murders and the killings of other Black folks at the hands of the police. But this happened in May. It's now September, and I don't want, November to roll around or January to roll around, and what the HCBA is committed to doing isn't getting done, and it's falling off the radar. So my challenge to the HCBA and the affinity bars is to hold us accountable and let us know what we can do to be an ally and continue to be an ally in this fight, because you've got a system of oppression that's been established for 400 plus years. And it isn't going to be dismantled overnight, but we do need to continue to take strides to bring about change.
Brandon, I just want to follow up before you leave. So as a leader in the Hennepin County Bar Association, and I will ask Dyan this question a little bit later as well, you have a very diverse membership, and you may have a small or large, or at least a portion of your membership that may not subscribe to this idea that there is systemic racism and that we need to change in some way. Can you talk about how, as you start to do this work and really invest in this work, are you communicating with all of your membership, even those who, quite frankly, may disagree with this, to really push the organization forward, to really invest long-term in kind of this systemic change?
Judge, that's a really good question. And we had some pretty extensive conversations at the executive board level about that. And I guess if this is a fireside chat and you want us to be candid, there was disagreement with some of the board about the statement that the HCBA issued in conjunction with the MSBA and other bar associations was not strong enough and should have gone further. And that's a conversation that continues to happen. There are some members who feel that we shouldn't be in this space at all. I don't believe a lot of that voice is on our board or on our executive committee, but that is something that we have to be mindful of. But I think my response as a leader is, frankly, if you can give me a reason why we shouldn't be in this space other than it makes you uncomfortable and just go with the status quo, I'm willing to hear it. And every time I've asked that question, no one can give me a meaningful answer other than we should just be focused on being lawyers. So if you can't give me a meaningful response, then I encourage the person to reflect on, well, I can give you 10 reasons, ranging from my own personal experience to experiences of others, for why we do need to be involved. And I think ultimately, like any organization that's got a diverse membership, a good majority of the members support being involved in this space, and we're going to continue to, reflect the goals and the ideas of the organization.
And then I know I want to let you go. Are there any final final remarks you want to make before you have to leave us tonight?
Sure, I'd just say really briefly, and I kind of touched on this earlier, this isn't something that just changes overnight. I mean, let's think about a Black man was shot and paralyzed at the hands of police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, just a month ago. We're not seeing any change. It's just on video now. So I really would encourage folks to continue to roll up the sleeves and try to do the work, but also hold organizations accountable for providing support to their members to be engaged in the community, because it's going to be you know, an all hands on deck, as I said earlier, issue in order for us to bring about meaningful change. And everybody's got different resources that they can supply. Maybe you don't want to march, so you can send money. Maybe you don't want to send money, but maybe you've got access to lobbying efforts. Figure out what you can do that makes you comfortable and be involved.
Thank you, Brandon, and I appreciate you participating, and have a good night.
All right.
I want to pivot back to the discussion. I know I jumped a little bit off topic or out of the way, but I want to get back to really talking about using our own words and really dig down into what we need to do. And I want to turn to MNAPABA's statement as it relates to George Floyd. What struck me about MNAPABA's statement, and I will read that it indicates or stated, when there is an imbalance of power, our position as members of the bar and our understanding of the rule of law makes it even more critical that we stand strong against any form of injustice. We recognize the generational failures of our government and criminal justice system in protecting the Constitution and human rights afforded to Blacks. As part of that statement, that talks about how, as lawyers and as individuals who are learned in the law, we have a special place in this fight, not just as organizations, but as lawyers. I want to start with you, Anne, to talk about, as lawyers, what are some of the things that we can do individually and as groups to really push this work forward?
Thank you, Judge. There's actually so much we can do. We are in positions of power and privilege, and Brandon started to allude to it. Part of it is just knowing that there are different ways in which we can contribute. All of us understand and can interpret the law. We have access to making changes within the law, to how we interpret cases, what we bring forth. In terms of what we can specifically do to address anti-racism, I would encourage every organization to join the Law Firm Anti-Racism Alliance. This is just a network of law firms predominantly, but also some corporate in-house departments who are joining forces to use their pro bono efforts to specifically address systemic racism. And so what that organization is doing right now is compiling a number of different laws that are racist or that keep racism intact and trying to address them one by one. We have the ability to do impact litigation, but we can't do it in a vacuum. We really need to make sure that we are partnering with different community organizations, grassroots organizations. And similarly, this is what was done during the civil rights movement. It was a combination of very thoughtful legal strategy and impact litigation coupled with a grassroots movement that complemented each other, that led to some changes. And so similarly, we can leverage our positions, our pro bono efforts, or support the organizations like the NAACP and support their efforts. For those of us who might not be involved in litigation efforts, there are other ways. Those of us who are in large law firms, for example, we have access to wealth. We have access to boards. We have access to people in leadership positions that we can influence. So being willing to leverage the power that we have and the privilege that we have, whatever it might be, however marginal that privilege might be, being willing to leverage it to do something on a more systemic level. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, no matter where we are, each of us has an opportunity to look for ways to de-bias our systems. You know, it's just woven into everything. So as long as we can take the skill of being a lawyer and issue spot and take a critical eye at everything, every policy, every practice, every norm, then we can start to figure out how is this, you know, perpetuating biases, and what can we do to mitigate the impact of that.
Kelvin, you want to jump in on that and tell me from the Hispanic Bars Association's perspective, what are some of the things that we can do individually as lawyers?
Sure. Well, excuse me, as Anne said, you know, we can begin by addressing this in our offices, by calling it out when we see it. You know, it becomes less scary when we made a commitment to each other that we're all in it together and that we're going to do this. It's easy to ostracize one person for speaking out, and it's far more difficult to ridicule an entire profession or an entire contingent of saying, you know, you're a law firm. I think that at a broader level, lawyers have an incredible amount of resources that they can wield in order to make sure that we're addressing systemic racism. And then touched on this too. One of the things that law firms have sort of announced they're doing, especially big law firms, that lawyers should continue to do, and I hope that many of us here engage in these types of efforts, is to address laws that are racist or that enable a racist system. So, for example, qualified immunity. It's inescapable that qualified immunity gives officers carte blanche to engage in racist policing without being held accountable. Many law firms have announced that they're forming legal groups to defend their firm, or they're forming pro bono alliances to specifically address this issue, to tackle qualified immunity and to you know, lobby Congress and attack the law in courts as well. So I think it's important that we, especially for those of us who are fortunate to work at a place that has a lot of resources and wealth, to make sure that we're reaching out to the people in power within these firms to make sure that the firm is using its resources to address these kinds of issues.
I want to stay on the line of this topic, but really talk a little bit to you, Darnell, and Deidre. You're going to be following up on this. So as organizations and as lawyers, we tend to stay in our own silos. We tend to only do things with lawyers, whether it's CLEs and galas and things. And after the death of George Floyd, one of the things that I saw that was different was lawyers were actually out in the community, whether it was, you know, out there cleaning up after the riots or providing food or doing things where we were interacting with the community. How can we seize on this momentum to start to build the trust with the general community and really build those lasting connections that can help us push this mission forward? And I'll start with you, Darnell.
Thanks, Judge. So this has really been the focus of our Wild initiative. We've formed sort of this, and I should say, it stands for the Wanton Injustice Legal Detail, and what it is a bridge between community voices and lawyers. That's really the goal here, and it's leveraging our unique position within TCDIP of having both corporate and private practice member organizations, and recognizing that there is power in that community working together alongside our community leaders and community organizations, learning from them and working with them to begin to address a lot of these issues that have been pervasive, as Brandon mentioned, even for the past few hundreds of years. And so a lot of our we have several projects, sort of, I guess, focuses under under WILD, one of which is education equality. And so we're working with organizations who have been in this area for years and years, and we're learning from them. We're putting our members in front of those community leaders, learning from them, and then organizing in terms and wielding sort of the information that they've given us, and working with them to begin to combat the things that the issues that they bring up. Other examples of initiatives that we have are Black wealth and opportunity. So we again are sort of leveraging some of our corporate partners who are in that space and have done work in that space, and positioning them alongside community leaders who have been in this space as well. Again, learning and then organizing, positioning ourselves, and then doing. One thing I'd say too is that like you mentioned, Judge, what we've essentially tried to do with WILD and are doing is break down those barriers in terms of the silos that we build, of just being attorneys in general, just being attorneys of color. You end up seeing a lot of familiar faces at a lot of the events and things that we do, and you don't end up seeing a lot of community faces at a lot of the things and places that we do. And so and that disconnect is, if, for lack of a better term, unhelpful when it comes to addressing issues that affect not only our community but the community at large. And so the only way we can begin to affect change in the legal community is to start with the broader community. If, for example, I were to suffer the same fate as George Floyd, I'm no longer a part of the legal community. I can't experience a vibrant and inclusive legal community that the one that TCDIP strives for. And so we need to, in addition to breaking down those barriers that exist within the organization, if you begin even with like infant mortality rates, all the way through test biases and education inequality, and all these barriers that exist for folks who look like me to get to the table even, and then you add additional barriers to having your voice matter at the table. It becomes before now, I would say it would have seemed hopeless, and even now I find myself being hesitant to get my hope up too much, because I've seen it not change. I've seen things not change, as Brandon alluded to earlier. And one of the most important things I think that we're doing with our member representatives in our organization is reminding them that out of the hundreds of millions of folks in America and who make up this country, you are uniquely positioned. You are in this place, in this profession, in your place of employment, who you are for all types of reasons that you were brought to this table at this point in time to bring the perspective that you have to help us make that change. And those things matter. And just because you practice law in one particular area doesn't mean you are powerless for issues that are unfamiliar to you. And you are uniquely positioned with the education that you have to begin to issue spot, like we talked about before, and call out things. Have a smell test of sorts that says that doesn't smell right, or that doesn't look right. That shouldn't be. And a lot of that begins with listening to our community members, hearing their stories, and applying our lawyer brain to those, and figuring out what those issues are, and then working alongside them to begin to address those issues. So that's a lot of what we've been trying to do in our organization, a lot of what we've been organizing to do. and the work that we've done so far already.
Adrian?
Thanks, Judge. Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about seizing this opportunity and this question of building trust in the community, I think is simple in words, right? It's the idea of consistency and putting your money where your mouth is, not to be cliche, but really standing by and continuing to do the work that we've all said we're going to do. I think about what we're doing as organizations and what we're telling our members, right? And so they will say, as Brandon mentioned before he left, we want to make sure that in November, in January, we're doing some of the things that we have said, we've put out in statements, we've committed to doing. And so, I think that really is the key in terms of building that trust in the community. As Darnell mentioned, WILD has been really focused on, breaking down the barriers, not working in silo, and working alongside affinity bar organizations, but also community organizations. And we've, WILD is a little bit different in that we've been focusing on changing systems also outside of the legal profession, right? And so I think about Anne's point earlier when she said, we have to think about barriers from like the law school part, right? Like what are some of those barriers that are preventing a more diverse class at all the law schools? And if we really go down the rabbit hole, which is what really needs to happen for us all, for people in general to understand how everything's connected, you have to go down the rabbit hole. You have to realize that education, which is one of WILD's initiatives, as Darnell was just talking about, what the barriers are in education from even K through 12, right? So we're not even talking about college necessarily yet from the beginning. And so when you think about that, you also think about inequities in the medical field. There have been so many articles and studies coming up about the disparities in health, in women's health, Black women, birth rates, things like that. And so when you go down the rabbit hole, you realize that there are, as Darnell said, we're uniquely positioned to engage with the community, to listen and apply our lawyer brains, but also realize that, we're people first before we're lawyers. And as people, yes, we have specific areas of expertise, but there are also people in our organizations, especially for an organization like TCDIP that has law firm member organizations as well as corporate legal departments. When you think about the fact that those corporate legal departments, right, they're in-house at corporations, and those corporations have people who are outside, who are working outside of the legal profession, and they have certain interests and expertise too. When you think about lobbying, if you think about marketing, people who could work on teams that would be able to contribute to projects or programming that isn't necessarily legal in nature. And so, Brandon was mentioning initiatives like voting rights initiatives and Know Your Rights campaign. If you think about projects like that, where you would need somebody to volunteer to create a flyer for an event that's happening, right? Or things like that, and really using resources in that way to get things done. And we've already started some of those conversations, companies coming on to help us with projects in different areas, because we're also working in the police reform area, thinking about projects and programming there, housing, and again, as to Darnell's point, not working by ourselves. So we are going to be collaborating with organizations like the Volunteer Lawyers Network and Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid and organizations that are already doing the work, because what we're trying to do is we don't need to start from scratch because there's so many organizations doing this heavy work already. And that ties into the trust piece. If people in the community already know about some of these organizations doing some of this work, and we collaborate with them and say, hey, what is it that you need from us? You know, what can we give you? What specific need do you have that you think we can fill? And then we push their work forward. You know, that gets us to, yes, it's, you know, we all know it's not going to be an overnight change, but it gets us to the change faster if we're all working together and really supporting people who are really deep in the work. And that I think will translate into trust with the community members.
So Dyan, I want to pull you into this discussion regarding seizing on the momentum of building trust with the general community. In addition to representing the Bar Association as a whole, you also occupy a special place in that I believe you're the only one in this call who is not sitting in a room in the Twin Cities. You are in outstate Minnesota, and you know, in St. Cloud, where you know there is a growing Somali community. In southern Minnesota, there's a growing Hispanic community. There's a large Native American community in northern Minnesota. So all of these issues of race are happening around the state. And yes, Minneapolis is the epicenter, but what are you hearing from your membership in outstate on what it is that they are doing and what they need to push this work forward?
Well, thank you. You know, that is a unique challenge, as I said before, that we have just given the role that we have, and personally, given my geographic limitation or my geographic location. I wish I could say that I knew what all of our members needed. We are still in that collection of information phase, if you will. We're trying to make sure that our lines of communication with all of our members across the state are opened up. And obviously, COVID-19 has made that more of a challenge to us now than ever. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to pull together, sort of in the name of the town hall spirit, if you will, that's been becoming more popular through this platform. We're going to pull together members of our leadership from the district bar associations from all across the state and have conversations with them about not only what they need to fulfill their leadership roles, but what their constituents need in the greater Minnesota collective. You know, I go back to one of the primary things. Civic education has always been high on the MSBA's priority list as well. And I think we have a unique circumstance now where engaging in that community conversation about issues associated with civic education is even more important. I think it is really easy for people from greater Minnesota to say that's a Minneapolis problem. And that's just not the case, as you've pointed out, Judge. We have pockets of these problems and these issues that are bubbling up and surfacing in all areas of our state. And I guess if I could say if one thing good has come from COVID, it's this platform has given us the ability to have those communications in a way that we probably never even imagined. There's no longer the need to get in your car and drive so that you can meet people like we're having here tonight. We can have these conversations and open those lines of communication in a way that I don't think anybody here ever imagined. So, you know, the short answer to your question is we don't know what the answer is yet, but we're looking for that. So, I think, you know, one thing that I've always sort of tried to live, and I tell this to my team at work all the time, is as one person, we can't do very much, but as a collective, we can do so much more. I have that Anne Frank phrase in my office on a plaque, and I go back to that often. And this conversation has really cemented that for me this evening, that we all have great ideas individually, but just imagine how loud our voice is when we start talking together.
So Frank, I want to pivot to you a little bit to talk about how loud our voices are in talking together. One of the more powerful symbols that lawyers did as it relates to the response of George Floyd was the moment of silence and solidarity at the Hennepin County courthouse. And seeing all of those lawyers standing together in solidarity from all walks of life, that sent a really strong message. But the cynic in me and others is that oftentimes you grab your phone and take a picture and you go on social media, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag stand together. And it's one of those things where you try to be in the moment, and then after that moment ends, you don't put in the work. Can you tell me what are some of the things that MABL is doing to really seize on that moment, to say, we had this moment, but now here's the hard work we need to do, and here is how we are enlisting you to do that hard work?
Sure, sure. No, I think you hit it, because that protest in solidarity was amazing. The fact that, it was less than a day's notice for most people. I actually had one of my colleagues who were still doing mandatory, work from home, and he had just stopped in the office to pick something up in shorts, and he saw the message and he just went out. And he was one of those there and wearing shorts and t-shirt. He didn't have the requisite, suit and black mask, but he just wanted to be there. So I think that momentum, right? How do you keep it going? And it's hard. We've seen it with, gun legislation. We've seen it with other things. It's hard to keep that. And our goal is to continue to educate, whether it's the legal community, but also provide people with the tools so that they can help themselves in their self-representation. So one of the big things that we're doing is we're focusing on the legal community on one side and focusing on the Black community or the community at large on the other side. And we partnered up with the National Lawyers Guild and Legal Rights Center to do a Know Your Rights training and a legal observer training where we could have people lawyers come from all walks to learn that so they can go liaison. And they signed up for groups where that if protesters needed people either do a training or be an observer, we can then email the people who attended that training to do that. Other thing that we were really think it's important. I mean, people have their feelings as we come up to this national election, but voting. It's one of the most important things, rights that we have. And, Congressman John Lewis said it just recently, it was a couple months before he unfortunately passed away, that, it's the most powerful nonviolent tool that we have in our democracy. And that's no understatement. And we're working with the Hispanic Bar Association and the Federal Bar Association's Diversity Committee to do a seminar in a town hall that kind of like, a way that we can include not only legal professions, but college students, high schoolers, anyone who wants to attend, talking about voter suppression, the need to vote, mail-in voting in the age of COVID and everything that's going on, mail fraud and all that. And Secretary of State Steve Simon and others will be part of the panel. And, right now it's scheduled for October 1st at 3 to 5. And, we have close to 200 people have signed up. So it's really great. We want to keep the messaging, keep the, word going on those things. But it's incumbent of us to continue as a board to continue to come up with these ideas, but use our resources. I think Anne and the others have said, we've got resources here in the legal community. So continue to use our allies, use our resources to keep it top of mind. And it's not going to be easy. I can't tell you as we sit here today what our best strategies are to keep this as ever in top of mind as it is, as it was in May 2020 and as it is now in September 2020, has come June 2021. I don't know. And like you, Judge, I'm a little bit of a cynic too, to think that, people are going to start forgetting about these things and it's not going to be as top of mind for others. But, it's our goal as leaders. That's what we have to do. We don't have to do all the work, but we definitely have to be the ones in the room who are being the cheerleaders, who are delegating and trying to continue that messaging and that work so that others will continue to do the work with us.
Well, Anne, I want to throw that question to you as well. How do we not repeat the mistakes of the past. And looking at TDIP's statement, they quoted Martin Luther King back in 1967. He said, "Riots are the language of the unheard. The winter of delay has led to the summer of riots." After the beating of Rodney King, that led here in Minnesota to the creation of the Racial Bias Task Force. And they created a document which had over 181 things that we can do to move the ball forward. After Philando Castile, we were like, this is horrible. We have to do something. And after the knee on George Floyd's neck, we are now back in the summer of riots. I will say now we're in the fall of change, and it's Minnesota and winter is coming. How do we avoid the winter of delay again?
That's a wonderful question, Judge. I think there's something, well, first, let me put a little context. With every social justice movement, there's always ebbs and flows. And I think we are now in a part of flow where we're seeing a momentum. And I think that one aspect that is critically different about this moment in time versus, when Philando Castile or Rodney King or any of the other efforts or situations that arose within the last 20, 30 years, is that we now have we have more middle of the road white people who are waking up to this and wanting to step up and be allies. And so that in every movement, from abolition to civil rights, in every instance, whenever there's been change, we needed this coalition that includes those who are in the majority as well as those who are in the minority coming together to advocate for change. So I think right now, because there's enough white allies who are incensed and outraged and, their eyes are open, we've got to leverage this. And I think we will continue to see momentum until the next big change happens. So similar to all of the protests, the grassroots movement, the impact litigation that led to the civil rights the changes in law. I think we're going to see that with this particular moment in time. And much like Dyan had mentioned earlier about there is the fact that we are in this pandemic and people, they could not turn it away, right? It was in their Facebook feeds. It was being shared. More people were being exposed and they had a visual that got at the heartstrings and raised this consciousness of, oh, we can't, this is unacceptable. And again, I'm going to go back to the civil rights movement because a similar tipping point happened in the consciousness then with photographs of, the fire hoses on protesters and the dogs, that were being used on the protesters. It was that shock and awe that reached more of the mainstream America and outraged them that helped lead to a change. And I think we are in that moment now. So when it comes to how do we keep this momentum going? How do we just keep each of us, but individually in our organizations and collectively as a coalition, we have to come together and continue to come up with a strategy of where we want to go, what we specifically want changed, and then continue to involve people, including allies, in that vision and that strategy development, and then we keep pressing forward. But I think we're in a moment right now.
And Breia, I want to talk to you a little bit about that moment. When Frank was talking and he mentioned voting, he paused a little bit and he had to give a caveat about, I don't know where you stand. unfortunately, things like voting, like criminal justice reform, where we're at in our discourse is that we've been unable to have these discussions because we go to our various corners and we just come out with our talking points and our weapons, and we're not listening to one another. Rather, we are talking past one another. From the perspective of your organization, what is some of the strategies around messaging for us to not talk past one another, but actually figure out how we can have discussions about this issue, criminal justice reform, systemic racism reform, without it being one of those things where you have your liberals talking about it being a real thing and your conservatives saying it's the boogeyman?
So there's a lot there. I think from a conversational perspective, I really think that we need to have conversations across our silos, across our affinity bars, across our organizations, and create structures for that to occur. I also really appreciate, Dadri, this summer when you gathered us all to start talking about the work that we are doing and how we can do this as a collective. Even among us on this call tonight, we have a lot of power. We have a lot of ideas, and we, others talked about the connections and the resources that we have. If we were to come together across all of our organizations and come together with our partner members, our clients, our community, whether it's with respect to the Allen Page Foundation or the Federal Reserve or health institutions, if we were to really come together and identify for the state of Minnesota, what are our priorities going to be, right? Because I think each of us are, as lawyers, we are engaged in the daily practice of law. That is a daily work that we are engaged in, and that takes long-term systemic commitment. And I think, how do we transition that into a practice of anti-racism and discrimination as well? And I think, Dadri, I really like the work that Wild is doing to think about, are there others within our businesses that have special talents, whether it's marketing or lobbying or others? What about chief strategy officers, chief innovation officers? If we could really tap that and combine and leverage the talents that we have as lawyers to identify in the state of Minnesota, here are laws that we want to address and identify and figure out, do they maintain the status quo, or are there opportunities for change for the betterment of our larger community? I think if we were to do that and come up with a plan and engage others to help us implement it, then maybe we would start to push towards transformation.
Dadri, your name was called out, so I do want to go back to you. Can you talk about what moved you to convene folks to talk about this, and what was that response?
Yeah, so really what happened, Darnell and I, started out the idea of Wild as, again, working in tandem with community organizations and, with our member organizations and community organizations. And it was just a logical next step that we would also include the affinity bar. Or I really don't think it was, I don't have anything extremely insightful, like I had an epiphany one day when I was at a particular place. It was just like a natural flow of thought. We should be doing things together. For too long, we've all been doing things in our little pockets. And for me personally, for those of you, some of you know me a little better than others, but I'm more of a straight shooter. And so it's one of those things where I don't care who gets the credit for doing XYZ. My personal perspective is, here's the work that needs to be done. Here are the people who can do this work. Can we just get together? If, for instance, Wild, ELG, Wild and MABL are doing something and MABL really wants it to be in their name, we don't care, right? Like, will MABL, and not to call you out, Frank, but, kind of to call you out. You know, and so it was just this idea of we need to be working together to get this work done. That's the only way the change is going to be effective, and that's the only way the change is actually going to happen, perhaps in our lifetime, right? Like, I definitely understand that the change isn't going to be overnight, but my whole thing is we shouldn't wait another 400 years, right? We shouldn't have to, come back, or I don't know, whatever we do. And only then, this aspect of policing is changed in the next 400 years. Kelvin talked about qualified immunity. 50 years or 100 years later, that's when there's going to be a shift there. No, if everybody bands together, that's what will happen. And that's one of the things I wanted to say about seizing the moment and really having things happen even beyond the fall, and to maybe assuage the cynic in you, Judge, the cynical part of you. One of my personal perspectives on this is, just like we talk in D&I, especially in the legal profession, especially in the law firm, about associates having sponsors. So sponsors different from mentors. We talk about associates really needing sponsors to be the ones to tot them up when they're not around, right? They're the ones who are going to really have access to leaders who would be in a position to help that associate maybe get on the next big case, or maybe that senior associate is up for partner, and that sponsor is kind of the liaison. I think about some of this work in the same way. And when I use the term ally specifically in this context, I'm talking about our white allies, so not allies in terms of the organizations we're working with here. And I think that the key to this is some of those people, Anne talked about it, right? Like the middle of the road white person who's really buying into the importance of this, the time sensitivity, really saying, yes, all this work needs to be done. I think we should apply the sponsorship method there. Those white people in our organizations, on our boards, they're the ones who really need to speak up when we the diverse leaders, right? The Black woman, the black man, when we're not around, when they're having that private moment with somebody who maybe, to your point, Judge, doesn't necessarily agree with XYZ, they will be courageous and brave enough to say, I hear what you're saying, but here is why it is important. Now, here's why we need to do this. Here is why, remember in June when we issued that statement, this is exactly this kind of programming, this kind of project. This is exactly what that statement was talking about. Here's an idea, we need to do this, and here's why, right? So that same concept of sponsorship comes into play here. And it really goes to the idea that being an ally is an action verb, right? It's not a noun. Being an ally means you are doing something. So while you are learning, there's an education piece. You're learning more now about some of these issues you never knew before. But I think too often people think they have to learn 100% of everything before they can do anything, and quite frankly, I just don't think we have time for that, right? Like we've lost so much time already, and so I think it's this idea of the white people who are in our organizations and in our circles and in these spaces really need to not back down, right? And really help bring their fellow white people, along with them, and remind them about the statements, remind them. And that's the part that I think Brandon, was talking about too, that accountability piece, right? It's holding everybody accountable to the statements that they've made to their members and then to the community at large.
All right, Kelvin, I want to bring you into the conversation as well, but before I do that, I'm going to make a public service announcement. I am an eternal optimist with fleeting moments of cynicism. Just so we all know, I'm an eternal optimist with fleeting moments of cynicism. But with that, Kelvin, I've been in the legal profession for a longish amount of time. And in being in the legal profession, I cannot remember a time in which all of your organizations and all of our organizations have spoken with such power and unity, spoken with such power on the issue and in one voice. Each of you have issued statements about the killing of George Floyd. MABL issued a statement on criminal justice reform. A group of organizations, and I believe the Minnesota Women's Lawyers, MABL, Hispanic Bar Association, and the MNAPABA all sent a letter to Governor Walz about the importance of diversity as it relates to appointing the next chair of the Judicial Selection Committee. And then MABL issued a statement about the criminalization of Black and brown people. These are not statements that we saw in the past, coming from many of our organizations. What has moved us to this point where we are now not holding our tongue and speaking up on these issues? Kelvin.
Well, I think, frankly, it's our civic duty to, make sure that when issues like this occur, that we speak with a unified voice and we highlight the ongoing systemic issues in our society. It's important that our government represents the community that it serves, and that it serves the community that it seeks to serve. For the MHBA, it's always been important to speak out about injustices that happen in society, and perhaps in the past we hadn't done it as often as we should have, but the unfortunate killing of George Floyd really brought to mind and forced us here to highlight the importance of speaking up and making sure that our members understand that we won't stand for these types of injustices. One of the things, and I should have said this earlier when I first turned the call, our president, Vaughn, whom she unfortunately couldn't join us today, but one of her major platforms this year is to sort of create programming that encourages law students and encourages that pipeline to enter into public service work, because historically there's always been this mistrust of government coming from diverse communities. Speaking personally, I can tell you, I'm not from Minnesota. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I never had a good idea of what the government meant, and I never really respected as a youth, what the government stood for. And in part, that's because of these narratives that are formed when you're growing up in these communities, and you hear all these awful stories, and you see your family members being disrespected and treated in inappropriate manner by government agents. So it's important, that us as diverse leaders having the opportunity to go to law school and pass the bar and practice law, that those of us who can, we also get into public service, so that when that pipeline is coming through and they look up top, they see that there are people serving them that look like them, that are from the same background as they are.
Thank you, Kelvin. Breia, I want to give you an opportunity to address that question, and then also address the question, why is it important for your organization to be in this space, and give any final comments before I know you have to get off the this Zoom discussion.
Well, thank you, Judge. And it's really, I really value these opportunities to come together and discuss. And I hope that we on this call do this again soon. I think the question that you asked, I think the moment or the momentum is that within our community, I think we've really seen what happens when we don't have or we don't use our voices to intervene, and it has tragic consequences. And so we as an organization and as individuals really want to identify ways in which we can utilize our own voices, amplify the voices of others. And when there are times then you may feel like you can't use your voice, maybe as a result of a conflict, or maybe there's fear involved, that you can come to our organizations and find support and allow us as organizations to help amplify the voices of others for the betterment of our community.
Thank you, Breia. So I do want to talk to you, Frank, and maybe Kelvin as well. I talked about kind of the power of some of these statements. And the one that has stuck out to me as a judge and previous lawyer, I know that, the prosecutor makes his case in chief, followed by the defense, and they respond, and then there's a rebuttal. And it seems to me that your organizations issued a stinging rebuttal to some of the attempts to criminalize George Floyd. And again, going back to a lot of my being in the law for a while, I have not recalled a time when statements such as this, so frontal, were issued by organizations, whether it's MABL or the Hispanic Bar Association or MNAPABA. And I just want to read a little bit of the statement that really stuck with me. George Floyd's criminal history and struggles with substance abuse were offered with the same goal: to distract, dehumanize, and play upon deeply rooted and indelible racist stereotypes. This is not right. We believe that all Americans are protected by the same Constitution, irrespective of where they live, their prior encounter with law enforcement, or their past struggles. You went on to outline kind of in a, I believe, a powerful manner what this means when you stated that we need to look no further than what occurred in the aftermath of the death of Eric Gardner, as if selling loose cigarettes warranted the death penalty. Michael Brown, suggesting a teenager's physical size and unproven, unrelated criminal conduct justified his killing. Achille Gurley, suggesting that Mr. Gurley was more of a threat because he was killed in the vicinity of public housing and because of his physical stature. Tamir Rice, as if a 12-year-old child's physical size and his mother's lifestyles excused his killing. Freddie Gray, emphasizing where he lived, his physical stature, and prior interaction with law enforcement to exonerate his killers, and countless others. This is not a new phenomenon or a new tactic, nor is it creative, new argument Officer Lane's lawyers happened upon. It is a phenomenon so familiar and prevalent, we all know it when we see it. While the strategy may not be new, the pain it causes cuts deep every time it is wielded and unmistakably screams to every person of color, your Black and brown bodies do not matter, and you are less deserving of the protection of law. What moved you, or why did you decide to issue such a stinging rebuttal when in the past, when this type of attack on kind of the victim occurred, we have not done that?
Well, Judge, I think, this is something that after seeing this over and over and over and over again, and then seeing something so, I'm very partial here, so seeing something so clear cut as an individual begging to breathe and not being allowed to do so, and then having your convictions about everyone needs to have, understandably, a fair day in court. But then all of a sudden that means that then you look at the victim and you decide to tarnish the victim in order to do that. There's just so many things that just came to a head for us that we just said, you know what, enough's enough, and this is something that we need to call out because it just perpetuates the feeling of, you know, people of color that I'm not a woman, I'm not a man, I'm not equal, because you can do these things and we know it and we see it and we feel the pain, but you know, it's something that's sort of an undercurrent that it's done so constantly, other people just think it's the name of the game. So for us, it was a chance to say, no, this is not right. This is not how the system works. We understand that there's a fairness in the system, that you're innocent till you're proven guilty, but this is not how the system works. And to be very uplifting and fair of our sister organizations, this was something that they jumped on too. And all in unity, I think it was actually last Friday, the day of the hearings, that we all published it to our membership and on our websites and social media all around the same time at 2 p.m. last Friday. So it was something that we all saw as we understand what's going on and we want to stand in unity in order to address that. So I'm proud of the organizations for doing that, but you know, it's sort of like I think Kelvin was talking about, as lawyers, what can we do to, you know, when we're talking about qualified immunity, can we stand together? Well, this is something that we can do. We can call out something as lawyers when we see that this isn't the appropriate way that you should prove up a case or try to bring out a case, especially when you're compounding so much hurt and pain, not on just Mr. Floyd and his family, but I mean, it just reverberates throughout Black and brown people in Minnesota and across the nation and across the world. So we just thought that, you know, enough's enough.
And I know that your organization signed on to it. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's just important, you know, MNAPABA recognizes that this type of, it's just unjust. And since we already have some precedent when it comes to how we treat the sexual histories of sexual assault victims and so forth, then we can apply a similar type of concept here. When there's information that is just based on detracting from the issues, it's just based on perpetuating stereotypes, inciting the fear and the emotions that go with the stereotypes, and taking away from the actual facts of the case and the legal outcomes that ought to happen, it's not serving justice. And so MNAPABA was proud to sign along to the statement because it's offering a potential viable solution for change.
And Kelvin, I know that your organization signed on as well.
Yes, thank you, Judge. You know, this is just another extension of calling out these injustices when we see it, right? Like the fact that these extrajudicial killings, these murders essentially are happening, and officers are able to get away with them, is not only because there are laws like qualified immunity that enables them to sort of get away with their conduct, but it's because society is so quick to shift the blame to the victim when it happens, and they're so quick to say, well, what about this? And what about that? When in fact, it has nothing to do with what's actually at issue here, which is the unlawful killing of a human being who deserves to live and did not deserve to have his life snuffed out like that, right? I'll say that with Kai Gurley, you know, he was murdered in the pink houses. I went to grade school across the street from the pink houses. At the time of his murder, I was living a mere 10, 12 blocks from where he was living. Officers, police in the pink houses, ever since I was a kid, they go in there under the pretense that these people are animal and savages and that they need to be controlled. And then you have a situation like a Kai Gurley happened where he gets shot in a dark hallway because you have these fearful officers going in there already thinking with a negative perception, you know, perpetuating these stereotypes that this person is dangerous. So it's on us to call that out and say these stereotypes are not okay, right? So we need to sort of frame the conversation in a way like it doesn't matter what this person's history is or what other things they did. What we're talking about is, was the officer's conduct here reasonable and was it lawful? Should it have happened, and it shouldn't have?
So I see that we are at about 6:54, so I do want to kind of move towards wrapping up. I said earlier when I was talking to Brandon before he left, I asked a question to him, and I'm going to throw that out to each of you. And I'm going to start with you, Dadri. The question is, why is it important for your organization to be in this space at this time?
Yeah, thanks, Judge. You know, TCDIP's mission is to attract, recruit, retain, and advance diverse attorneys here in the legal profession. And, you know, some of our values include ensuring that our diverse attorneys are welcome into a vibrant and inclusive legal community. And I think it's important for TCDIP to be in this space because the legal community does not exist in a vacuum. The legal community exists in the Twin City, right? You know, speaking to our name, Twin Cities Diversity in Practice. And the in practice part is also key to why I think it's important we're in this space. It's in practice, meaning what we're doing. And if we want to attract new talent, you know, whether it's outside of Minnesota, outside of the Twin Cities, or attracting diverse people, Black students who are in high school or in colleges to the legal profession, we have to show them what we're about. And a part of that is doing this work and saying, listen, there are systemic anti-Black issues in our community at large. We have the collective power and resources to do something about it, and we will. And we will work with organizations in our community to do that work. I think it's important for us to do that because frankly, it's, you know, in line with our mission. When we think about retaining people in the Twin Cities, as Brandon said before he left, Minnesota is now on the map. Everybody knows where it is. And if we're going to try and, you know, retain people or again, attract people, we have to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, this is the Twin Cities. Here are all the issues you will be facing, not just as a Black lawyer, but a Black person living here, operating in this space in the legal profession. And so, you know, that's what it means to me. I think we need to be in that space where Darnell and I, you know, we've said this in different capacities, in different conversations with people. You know, we're Black people first. And so all the issues, all the anti-Black systemic racism affect us on a human level. And so we need to be doing work in that space before we can really say we're fulfilling our mission within the legal profession.
Now?
Thanks, Judge. Yeah, I think it's important for us for Twin Cities Diversity in Practice, for ELG, and for WILD, all to be in this space. I think, I mean, going back to sort of our unique composition in terms of being able to bring in both corporations and private law firms, but also because I think we've positioned ourselves and have a history of acknowledging the fact that these issues are beyond any individual organization. And that's the reason why Twin Cities Diversity in Practice exists. There's more power in the attorneys of color being under a collective, even though they may not represent numbers, have large numbers within their individual organizations. There is power in them coming together and being together and doing things together. People see that, and and building allies, having the programming and things that we've done, and so too is true here in terms of what response is required to begin to address 400 plus years of anti-Black racism. It is beyond us. It is beyond any one organization. It is beyond TCDIP, and the beauty in this, maybe the silver lining in all of this tragedy, I think, would be a collective community response in response to one of the most tragic events in our country's history, and one of the most documented events in our country's history. And if we can come together and show that not only is this issue beyond us, we've recognized that, we've reached out, and now we have formed a collective response with community members, with not just attorneys, other professionals, professionals of color, attorneys of color. We're all coming together to begin to address these things in our city, because it's necessary, it's needed, and that's what's required to see the seismic change that we want to see here. And in so doing, I think we begin to set precedent and examples for other cities in terms of how they can come together and begin to do the same in their individual cities, and to begin to have that sort of ripple effect across the country. To Brandon's point, again, all eyes are on us, and if we flop, that people are going to say, well, that's just what happens. But if we come together and do something and do it well, then that sets a precedent for other communities, and gives hope, frankly, to other communities that we could maybe do the same thing. These folks put their differences aside, recognized their shortcomings, and leveraged their collective strengths to do something. And so I think it's important for, getting back to your question, Judge, for TCDIP, ELG, for WILD to be in this space, because we belong in this space. All the other organizations here belong in this space, and we need everyone at the table to begin to address this work. So, yeah, that's my thought.
Ann?
We do need everyone at the table, and I think part of the reason why MNAPABA in particular wants to be involved in this at this moment is divide and conquer has been a strategy that has been used repeatedly throughout history to take away the power of groups of people that if they shared a common interest and joined forces, they would be more powerful. We saw that with the first race laws, and we saw that with the distinctions made during slavery between those that were within the house and those that were in the fields. And we see that now with the model minority myth that's been perpetuated about Asians, and how that has created these divisions that some of us who are in the Asian community have internalized, and some those of us who are outside of the Asian community can also have used as a reason to feel separate. But the truth is that we as Asians also deal with racism. It's different than how other people of color, how Black people, how Latinos, how other people face it, but it's still there. And in being able to unite, to not buy into the divide and conquer tactics that have been perpetuated for decades, for centuries, I think we have a better shot at really creating true change. The Census Bureau is predicting, that by 2044, I believe, that there will be no racial majority, which means that if all of us continue to band together and support each other and recognize that we have a lot more to gain together than by being divided, we will see significant change, not just within the legal profession, but within our society at large.
Thank you. Anne?
Thank you, Judge. I think from the MSBA's perspective, the reason we have to be in this conversation is that people expect us to be in this conversation. We are, as lawyers, we have a leadership component, or we're seen as leaders just simply because of that particular circumstance that we are in. But also as a bar association, I think people turn to us and expect us to be involved in these very important conversations, just as the others who are sitting here tonight have an expectation from their organizations that they were also to be involved. And I also think it's also important to note that as lawyers, we are sort of entrusted with ensuring equal and fair access to the legal system. We have that responsibility, and that's why I think that in our roles, we just need to be here and participating in this conversation.
Thank you. Kelvin?
Thank you, Judge. From the MHBA's perspective, it's our civic duty to make sure that we have a space and that we're advocating for our membership. You know, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, our membership for all of these affinity bar organizations, each one of them has experienced either through a family member or directly some form of discriminant act, right? And we need to make sure that we're speaking up for all of our members. And on a more personal level, it's our own personal civic duty to make sure that the organizations that we support and that we're involved in are actively engaging in addressing social injustices.
And Frank?
Thanks, Judge. I'll say, if not us, then who? And that question applies to everyone sitting in this proverbial room together today, right? If not now, then when? And it's a call to action because we need to do that. And so, you know, I'll steal words from one of my favorite artists, Lin-Manuel Miranda. You know, I want to be in the room where it happens, right? And just think about it. I believe this with all my heart, and I guess I'm a pessimist, but I like to be surprised. So I want to be an optimist. So I believe this with all my heart. If our legal profession, our public servants, whether it's the local, state, federal, were more diverse, there were more women, more people of color in the places, in the room where it matters, we would have a more fair and social and racial equitable system. Point blank, period, no questions asked. Because going back to what Darnell said earlier on, right? We need empathy. And you know, it's hard sometimes when you haven't had that situation. You know, Kelvin just said that, you know, a lot of the membership of the Hispanic Bar Association personally have had a situation where they felt racial injustice. You know, I've personally had that, whether in Jersey or here in Minnesota, right? And if you haven't had some of these experiences, it's hard. And you're learning and you're trying to pick it up. That's where it comes together when you have more people in the room that are diverse. And you can share your experiences, your thoughts, your comments, your opinions, your expressions, and people listen. Like you said, Judge, we've been talking over each other for way too long. And I can say that I firmly feel one way about politics, about social changes, and about the economy. But I hope that I have done, and I will hope to continue to do, where I listen to other people who don't feel that way, because we each have something to share. And we need to make sure we listen, hear, and then act. So Why do we need to be here? Because we need to provide a diverse perspective in order to help create a fair Minnesota, right? But we also, like Kelvin said, we need to do this because our membership demands it of us and our community demands it of us. So, you know, I repeat, right? If not now, when? And I think all of us are trying to answer that call, and all of us need to answer that call, whether we are just the Minnesota Bar Association or another affinity bar. We're all together and we all need to answer that call because we each need to bring our own unique perspective into trying to solve this issue.
Well, thank you guys all for your discussion tonight. I am heartened by the fact that we are starting and we are working together to address this. When I started the night, I talked a lot about how we are at a place of reckoning on the issue of racism, particularly systemic racism. I talked about how the death of George Floyd was yet another tragedy in which, in the aftermath, there was sadness and anger, and there was a confusion about where do we go from here. However, shortly after that, there was a resolve. All of your organizations issued statements, but you didn't issue just statements, but you started to come together to do the hard work of actually putting those statements into action. Frank talked about there being a call to action, but each of your organizations have answered that call. We need to continue to answer that call because, again, that is what our society wants of us. That's what our community wants of us, and that's what is the moral and right thing to do. Folks are sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're fed up of business as usual. And the heartening thing is that it's not just Black and brown folks anymore. It's our allies. It's white folks saying, you know what? Enough is enough. We are in a moment where now change is happening and we are moving things forward, but we have to learn from the past. We need to keep the momentum moving forward, and there is going to come a time where that momentum slows. That's going to be the time where we need to raise our voices, get behind that momentum, and continue to push it so that we actually get the change we need. We need to continue to communicate with one another and work towards the goal that we all have, which is equal access to the law for all of us. So with that, good night, and remember that Black lives do in fact matter.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Judge. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Judge. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave.